Up next, we take a moment now to share a few words with the pundit here regarding President Yoon's in-person diplomatic debut at NATO. For more, I have Professor LIM Eun-jung at Kongju National University live on the line. Professor Im, it's good to have you with us. Professor, can you hear me? I believe your mic is not on, Professor Im.
Sorry.
Right. No, that's fine.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry.
No, you're most welcome. Professor, before we touch upon President Yoon's remarks then, first, aside from denouncing Russia's atrocities in Ukraine, NATO leaders for the first time voiced concerns about the challenges posed by China. How do you explain this stance by NATO?
Well, I don't think this is a very sudden or abrupt change. Because we already saw some kind of signals or prologue already. For example, European Parliament, they recently published a report which is about the EU and the security challenges in the Indo-Pacific. Of course, it does have many important sectors that are related to the security challenges of European countries, especially in this region, in the Indo-Pacific. But one of the highlighted points was, again, the maritime security. That make a lot of senses to me because if you think about all the very dangerous and the bad situations in Europe now, they also need to diversify, for example, their energy supply. They have been probably too much dependent on the pipeline gas, natural gas from Russia. So for many European countries also, they need to again to diversify their energy supply as well. In the Pacific region, this is, of course, geographically speaking, it looks pretty distant again from the continental Europe. But if you think about all this technological development, especially in the field of transportation, this can be pretty closer now, to the European countries as well. So from their point of view, maritime security issue will be very, very much important, not only just for some military purposes, but also for their economic security, energy security issues too. So they really highlighted that point again, the maritime security issue or free navigation in the public ocean. So they already made up the conclusion with that specific report. So I won't be that surprised with this kind of how would you say the trend or changes we saw at the NATO summit.
Right, and staying with that, Professor Im, during his speech at the NATO summit, President Yoon Suk-yeol warned about the threat to universal values at a time of new conflict and competition, as my colleague Moon Gon-young mentioned earlier as well. Now, generally speaking, what are your thoughts regarding Yoon's address over in Madrid?
Well, again, there are still some controversies. Some will say, for example, NATO expanded too much, or that kind of NATO's expansion might have been regarded as offensive behavior or aggressive behavior from the Russia's point of view. So those critics will say that, again, that this war cannot be just solely Russia is not the only one who made all this situation. But for them, I would like to just, strongly highlight that. But no matter what happened, no matter what the reasons are, again, Russia was the one actually who invaded some other countries' territory and sovereignty with the force and with violence, which is obviously, needless to say, that's against the international law. So Korea, South Korea, again, the Republic of Korea, was a victim, actually, of that kind of aggression many decades ago. So how can the South Korea, Republic of Korea-like country not be defensive or not defend those kind of international law or all this, values and norms? We are again, the South Korea is really representative example that has survived out of all this, ashes after the Korean War. So I strongly, of course, I know, I mean, that there can be some criticism about the President Yoon's that kind of comment, but for me, I mean, or as a South Korean national, I cannot just agree more, I mean, with my president's that view or that comment.
Right, and staying with his comments, Professor Im, he also called for a concerted effort against North Korea's missile and nuclear weapons ambitions. How do you assess President Yoon's proactive policy with regard to denuclearization here on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, I think that was necessary too. Well, we don't want to be aggressive, or we don't want to be offensive to any of our neighboring countries. Again, China definitely is an important partner and still, the biggest trade partner. And even regarding the North Korea-related issue, China's support and the cooperation with China is indispensable. So we don't want to be, again, offensive to China or even to Russia. But again, the North Korea's that kind of consecutive missile test, for example, they have conducted the missile test 18 times, during the first half of this year. So that kind of number is really outrageous, and it is more than just just provocation. It's really threatening, the security of not only just of South Korea, of Japan, or even of China, or even with other those East Asian countries, or even Indo-Pacific country. So we, again, need to be really more cooperative and interactive with our neighboring countries to deal with this serious challenge, again, made by the North.
Right, and with those concerns in mind, of course, Professor Im, trilateral talks among the leaders of Seoul here, Washington and Tokyo were held over in Madrid as well, for the first time, that is, in almost 5 years. How do you envision future trilateral ties, as well as bilateral ties, perhaps, between Seoul and Tokyo?
Well, I did have a chance to travel to Tokyo briefly a few weeks ago, and I had a chance to meet some Japanese MOFA people or some politicians or other experts. We all have common concerns about the challenges made by North, as I just mentioned. So this cooperation is really necessary. Well, even though, there are some critical voices, even in this country as well, but this is a necessary step. But my concern is, again, still the historical disputes, especially more specifically speaking, the forced labor, that issue is really holding back all this further cooperation or trust between Korea and Japan. So I cannot be just solely optimistic about the bilateral relations because of the ongoing problems with Japan. But again, those multilateral cooperation to deal with the challenges by North, that I think is more than just necessary.
Right, and speaking about multilateral cooperation, Professor Im, along with South Korea and Japan, Australia and New Zealand were also invited to the NATO summit. Do you suppose this attempt by NATO to perhaps reach out to its democratic allies here in this part of the world ultimately pits this bloc against China and Russia, perhaps under the BRICS framework? And if that is the case, surely this division, that is, Professor Im, is not ideal in terms of global stability and security. What do you say?
Well, again, well, I don't want to blame some specific country all the time. But again, if you think about the sequence, again, Russia was the one who invaded, again, the Ukraine's territory. So who really started this, right? So I don't think we should not be really confused, I think, with all these, occasions. NATO's outreach to the Indo-Pacific region or Indo-Pacific democratic countries in this region, that is, again, one necessary process powerless to deal with this really a serious and real challenge made by, again, the Moscow and the President Putin. Well, I probably cannot agree with that kind of view. Again, we are now trying to make a block against China or against Russia. Again, rather, I would say, who really started all this thing. So again, we also need to protect our own people and our own territory and our own freedom, and then our system too. So, well, so I think we are more, reactive rather than just proactively aggressive to somebody else.
Right, a valid point then. All right, Professor Im at Kongju National University, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.